Hi, you're watching Dog-Eared Musings, and I get a lot of questions about where I get my bookish recommendations or how I know what books I want to read next. I will tell you that I watch a lot of book reviews on YouTube, but I also listen to a ton of book recommendations on bookish podcasts. So today I will be testing your and my knowledge by doing an Iceberg model of bookish podcasts that I know. So what is Tier 1? Our first pick of today is NPR's Book of the Day. Now, the reason why I'm putting this section or this podcast in Tier 1 is because you might not pick this podcast yourself. This podcast might be going on in the car when you're listening with your parents. It might be going on in the background of work, but you might pick up some useful information from it, and you might use this information at a party that you go to at your coworker's house after work that day. You might not willingly pick this podcast, but you might enjoy to listen to it when it's in the background. Another option that I think belongs in Tier 1 is LeVar Burton Reads. Now, again, the reason why I think that this belongs in Tier 1 is you might listen to LeVar even if you don't necessarily like to read in your leisure time. You might purely be picking this podcast for nostalgia value. And I might add that this is a really good nostalgia value podcast. He reads books out loud, and it is giving all the reading rainbow vibes. But again, I think that this is another Tier 1 podcast. You're kind of basic. Another Tier 1 pick is the Oprah's Book Club podcast. I'm putting this on Tier 1, but maybe a little bit lower than LeVar Burton, because you want to know what's popular. You want to know what's topical, though. But you also really want to know the juicy gossip that's going on in author drama. So you want to know who's been canceled for plagiarizing, who says that they've written a memoir, but it's not actually a memoir. That's when you want to listen to Oprah's Book Club. You want to know the books. Not really. You're mostly in it for the drama. Which, I mean, who can blame you? The drama's pretty fun. But again, Tier 1. Now, what belongs in Tier 2? I think that Marlon and Jake read dead people. Now, the reason why I put this book in Tier 2 is you know some pretty big author names, Marlon James and Jake, oh my god, I forget his last name. But anyway, they're two best-selling authors who co-host a podcast, and they talk about dead authors, so classic books. Now I put this at 2 because they're two pretty well-known authors. You don't really have to deep dive to listen to this podcast. Another Tier 2 book club podcast is the Celebrity Memoir Book Club. Now, I think that this is Tier 2 again because you don't really need to do a super deep dive into these book club recommendations, but it's also a really fun way to listen about the latest. Like if I want to know about Mariah Carey's new memoir, I might listen to this book club pick. I don't really need to hunt for the books, and it's not really going to do any hunting for me, but it's going to give me some pretty insightful information on the book itself. And that's why I put it as Tier 2. Now, Tier 3 is you're doing a little bit more deep dives. There's some niche books, some niche information, and I think that the stacks kind of goes in between Tier 2 and Tier 3. I think the host now is a little bit more well known, especially if you watch The Bachelor or any reality TV show. She's got some pretty well-known guest hosts for some of her episodes and a bunch of really exciting authors who talk along in her podcast. But she's also been able to mix up her well-known authors and guests with some deeper cuts and lesser known, which is why I'm kind of putting her in the middle. I love the Stacks. I geeked out when she commented on one of my Instagram posts. I've listened to her podcast for forever, and I think that she's a good happy medium. Books and Boba, I think, also is a tier 3 podcast. I think their Instagram is pretty active. And I would say that for Well Read Black Girl too. Her Instagram she has an imprinted book, and they are pretty well known, also giving a lot of really good information. I think that they're tier 3. Some deep cuts, but a very big Instagram presence for being kind of independent creators. Now, we go into some BookTube darlings. Books Unbound and The Cozy Club, I think, go into tier 4. I can count. Now, I think the reason why these go a little bit lower than tier 3 is you gotta know the bookish community a little bit, so there's a little bit more digging involved for your account. Now, these two books might not be talking about totally niche books. They might not be talking about totally niche books, but there's definitely some new and fun titles. I think that this is a lower level because you got to know the bookish community a little bit more in order to know that these podcasts exist, and they're really fun podcasts too. Their YouTube presence, these are for people who have a very large YouTube presence or Instagram presence, but their podcasts are maybe a little less known. Books Unbound probably is a little bit more known than Cozy Club, but it's not like NPR where your parents are blasting this podcast at 5 a.m. Probably more along the lines of somebody who watches BookTube too much is probably listening to this podcast on the treadmill. So, tier 5. I think a little bit lower than that is The Lavender Menace. Now this is run by Sunny's Book Nook, and they are another BookTube darling. Then their podcast, they do it with another co-host. I forget their name, but I'll link their name in the bio. Their podcast is super cool. It's a lot of bookish recommendations that talk about lesbian and sapphic recommendations that are film and book recs, as well as kind of anti-capitalistic books too, and movie recs as well. And they're really fun. The reason why I think this is a little bit deeper dive is just because it's more of a niche topic, and Sunny is always providing really thoughtful recommendations, as well as their co-host. It's definitely well worth a listen, especially if you watch their videos. It's kind of fun to hear how they bounce ideas off of their videos. Now, what is going in tier 6? I have 2 really niche podcasts. How many times can I say niche in a video? I don't know. But the reasons why I put these a little bit lower than everybody else is because these are podcasts that are really like specific themes that are just like kind of goofy, that you have to do a little bit more digging. They're fun. They're different. You might not necessarily read the books anymore, but it's definitely pulling into that nostalgia level. But there's a little bit more digging that needs to be done in order to find these podcasts. And that's the Babysitters Club, and Sentimental Garbage. These are a couple of podcasts that like really are lesser known, or at least they were lesser known to me before doing this video. And that's kind of why I rank them as on the bottom of the iceberg. Now, does my iceberg look different than yours? Probably, but that is the glorious thing about opinions. Everyone's opinion is different. So if my iceberg looks different than yours, you can verbally berate me in the comments below. Please don't. Actually, though, my therapy bill doesn't cover online trolling, so be nice. With that being said, please give me any recommendations of bookish podcasts that I should add, that I should listen to. And if you have your own bookish podcast and you're watching this video and you want to invite me to be on your podcast to talk about books, you can hit me up too. I always like talking about books in any kind of medium, and I've been known to have heard that I have a face meant for radio. So, take that with what you will. This has been Dog-Eared Musings. I'm Monika. Happy reading and happy listening.